Okay, so starting with the this lecture, what we're going to talk about today is how to create diagrams using Rhino and Illustrator. So here's an example of a diagram that we're going to create, basically showing what might be some sort of site analysis based on topography and showing some peoples and maybe a line of action or path or something of that nature. So here is another example is something a little bit more uh, maybe object oriented. So we can show some assembly sort of action. So these lines here are showing that this piece, this ball, sets into this block in a very specific fashion. We also have some just strict line drawings, maybe showing how, maybe on that surface, this surface here, how maybe one of these intersections or something like that gets pulled up or pushed down. So that is something there. So these lines that I'm using as red, for instance, I call those the verb or action lines. Uh, like I mentioned before, diagrams are all about verbs and actions, not so much about the objects themselves, but more about what relationships do objects have with one another and what kind of activities or actions might take place on that site or within the building or within the landscape, or how maybe one vegetation interacts with water and water flows, those kind of things. So that's what we're going to diagram today. And I'm going to show you how to create this diagram fairly quickly within Rhino. We'll create the surface. We'll make these lines that we can bring into Illustrator. We'll add these additional lines here, and we'll also add some people and entourage very quickly. It's very important also that we'll talk about the line weights, and you'll notice that both of these feature very strong outlines. One of the things about diagrams is that you want them to have a really big punch, visual punch. And just like like we learned in hand drawing, an outline of an object is an important thing to kind of contain what's there. And then there's a hierarchy of lines in between. You'll notice that I have lighter lines on the inside, and then also some dashed lines here to show the hidden lines where objects are obscured. Same thing over here. We have some hidden lines that are just barely visible. Now, this is maybe somewhat atypical in terms of how that we might show contouring of a surface within like a topography. Normally we might see these as contour lines that are horizontally dividing this surface up into different elevations. And that's an okay way of doing it too, but the Rhino gives us the opportunity to do either way. And so I wouldn't mind if you guys that might be interested in that could take a look at it this way. But this here, I think, having two-dimensional directions has gives a better idea of a surface. But certainly that may not be what you're looking for, and you're certainly welcome to do whichever way that you want to. A couple of things that you'll notice is that I'm using uh, a legal size paper for my new documents. So we'll go into how we create that. And the reason that I'm doing that here is that oftentimes we are going to be projecting to a screen digitally. So think about the output that you're going to be for these. What are they going to end up? Are they going to end up on a print, or are they going to end up on a poster? And then try to think about the various ways in which one what would be the best aspect ratio to choose. I prefer to start with kind of a legal, because then I have the white space around to fill up a screen that I can show digitally when I'm just showing them as one-off examples. And then also the aspect ratio of what you're trying to show. So having a diagram that's kind of long in one direction here, whereas you can see here, this is maybe a little bit more, I built this one as a square, okay? And the couple of other features that you'll notice on this one here is that we have some borders. You don't have to show this border, but we create these borders, we're going to create these borders in order to help us scale the images, because what we have here is a set of lines. We have a whole set of layers here of lines, and then we also have the render, which is a separate image, a separate file that we can turn on and off and adjust that independently, just to add another kind of layer of polish and finish. Same thing on this one here. We've got this layer here that we can turn off that just tones that surface to give it some definition to make it read a little bit better. The great thing is that when you do the surface lines this way with the two, both the X and Y direction line description, it really shows the contour surface pretty well, describes it, and then this is just an additional touch. You also see a couple of things in here. We do some drop shadows. Again, this is about trying to find that line between a realistic sort of set of elements, like these are tangible and physical in some sort of way, but yet not, you'll notice that they're super subtle, so that it doesn't overwhelm and take over the image. When you're doing diagrams, the important thing to remember is that what we want here is subtlety, especially because we want the line work and we want these things, these action lines, to be the most prominent feature. That what we're doing, what the relationship and the verb, the action that we are trying to diagram, should be the thing that pops out and becomes the thing that's read really quickly and easily. So, for example, just to give you an idea of what I'm talking about here, I have the opacity of this rendering turned down 25%, so it's just barely visible. This isn't the best because I rendered it on a kind of a grayish background. I prefer to render those things all on white, but if I turn this up, you can see that it's quite a darker rendering, and so, keeping that down into the 25% range really lets those things pop. And if we were to turn it off, it would still look great and it would still work. And that's what you're looking for, okay? You're looking for these things to pop and to jump out and be kind of perfect. And I've just noticed something that we could, add in here. In terms of line weight, we have some exposed edges, and exposed edges usually have a little nicer, a little thicker than these edges here. So you can go in and add some thickness on here. In this case, it's not that big a deal for the moment, but we might bump that up to like 0.75, just so that we get that to look, just to pop just a little bit more. See, that's where I get for being, kind of persnickety about these things. So, but little things like that can make a big difference in how an image and a diagram comes off. So there, now if we back up here, now see that starts to pop out a little bit more. That starts to read a little bit better. Okay, so anyway, I'm going to save that. Always save our work. Okay, so what we're going to do next is go into Rhino, and we're going to show you how to get this thing going, and then we'll jump into Illustrator and get that going as well. So give you a little bit of an interface overview of Illustrator really quickly, so that you can do these things quite fast. Okay, so let's go over into InDesign or Rhino and open up a new file. And you'll see here that I've already kind of done our first test, so I have all of the stuff that we were working on, but I'm going to start a new one, and we're going to start from the very beginning. Okay, so to start from the beginning, we're going to assume that we're going to build this topography again. Okay, so let's say, and there's a couple of different ways that we'll get into in future of being able to import images and diagrams and put them as backgrounds that we can trace over. This is particularly good for developing topographies. So let's go to standard over here. Okay, and then what we're going to do is just draw out some fake topography lines. Okay, and the way we do that is I like to use the interpolate curve. So if we had something on the background, this curve is going to be created based on strictly following in the lines of the points. Okay, the points always are on that line. So I'm just going to create some and then close these up. And then you can just hit the space bar to do the same command again. Okay, I'm just kind of making up topography that might be interesting. There we go down here. Maybe make something a little steeper here in this ravine. Maybe this thing starts to flatten out into a nice expanse. Okay, so that's pretty good. And then let's say that I'm going to, this is the crop of our site, so we're not going to have all of the topography, right? So we've got that. Now but you'll notice that if we double click on our viewport over here to the top, and let's go to our perspective view. I set up a different view, so I'll show you how to do that in a minute. So let's go to perspective, and you can see if we zoom out here, if we right click and drag and rotate, we can see that we've made everything on one plane, on our construction plane. Okay, so now to give these, we need to give these contours some elevation. So what I'm going to do, I know that I made this in feet and inches. Okay, so I know that that the contours probably going to be, if we look at our scale here, that's an inch, so it might be 2 inches or something like that. So we'll just go and take a look. Double click up here to get back to our multiple. And then what we want to do is keep the rectangle at our basis, so that's at 0. That'll become our kind of flat point. If we had contours that go off to the edge, that edge doesn't necessarily have to be flat at 0. It could actually have curves and undulations, and that would be cool too, but for this tutorial we're not going to have that. Okay, so I've got these selected up here. Now I can go down into my one of my orthographic front views or right views, so we can see this on the side, and we can start to raise this up and see what we're talking about. So it looks about like 1 inch. So what I'm going to do is just click on here and type 1. All right, and then so I've selected all of these by holding down the Shift key. Now, if I want to deselect one, I want to use the Control key down, hold the Control key down, and click on it. So I'm going to click at the outside edge, and that deselects that one, but these others are still selected. Now I can go over here and double click on my blue arrow, which is the vertical arrow, and I can type in 1 again, and that will move those up. Now we'll control click, control click, I lost it, so I'm going to have to shift click, okay. We know that that one is moved up too, so we can control click, get rid of that, okay, and then move the final one up. 1. All right, so now we have, if we go into our perspective view and right click, we can, and then I can scroll to zoom in or out. And so we can see some topography here. And looks like we have a little, it's pretty flat right at the moment. So what I'm going to do is select each one of these, and I'm going to scale them in 1 dimension. So I don't want to change their shape, so I don't want to do a 2D or a 3D scale, but I'm going to type in scale, and you can see if I use the down arrows, I can select 1D. So that means it's going to scale only in 1 dimension. So I want to do that, and then it's going to ask me where to start. Okay, and basically I want to start at 0, 0, at the origin point. So I'm just going to type 0, enter. Now I've got my origin point, and what I'm going to do is go down to the bottom here and turn on my ortho so that whatever I do is orthographic, and then I'm just going to type 2 for my scale factor. Now that's raised up twice, okay, and then I'll click in the viewport, so it's going to ask me because it's wanting me to know what direction I want to scale that, and I just wanted to go straight up. Okay, so now we've got it scaled a little bit. It's a little bit more dynamic. Okay, that's fine. Okay, so now what we want to do is we want to create a surface here. So, and I want to be able to see that surface, so what I want to do is come over and click on this arrow on my viewport. Right now it's set to wireframe, but I want to set it to ghosted. That's what I prefer to see. Okay, and then what I want to do is select everything here. Select. Another way, so I can click and drag. If I go from left to right, it's all inclusive, okay? And if I go right to left, you see that it's just going to be selective. So there's different ways of selecting these different types. So if you notice that if I go here and I do a bounding box, so I'm dragging from left to right, then it's a solid line. But if I halfway cross something, it's not going to select it. It has to be completely within the region of that box to select it. The other way is if I click from right to left, if I cross through these things, I'm just going to cross through these two, you can see that it's going to be selective. So it's kind of intersecting. Whatever intersects that box is going to be selected. So those are the 2 modes of selection. And again, if you want to hand pick everything, you can hold the shift key down and click each individual item. And to get rid of an item of the selection is control click. Sorry. I have to do some funny things. You guys don't have to get control. So, all right. So that's how we do it. So what we want to do is the other way is if this is our only geometry and we want to select it all, we can hold Control A, and that will select all. Okay, and then what we want to do is there's different ways that we can make a surface, and just about anything in Rhino has, I don't know, 4 or 5 different ways that you could actually create geometry given a set of information. So this is one way to do it. There's 2 or 3 others, maybe even more. But this is what I find to be pretty simple and easy. So we're going to go up into our command line and start typing patch. We're going to look for a thing called patch. If we start with a P, it comes up, and I can use the right arrow key, or down arrow key, sorry, and select patch and hit enter. All right. So now it's going to bring up this dialog box that gives us some options about how we might want to uh, develop this. Yours is probably going to start out with something like 1, 10, 10, and 1 here. Okay, I've experimented a little bit, and what I found, because of the scale, you want to think about the scale, and we can always look at our little dots here. And so to be more accurate, to follow these contour lines more closely, I need to make sure that the sample spacing is going to be small enough to keep it accurate. If it's 1, it's going to make big jumps, and it's not going to follow the contours very well. So think about this as resolution, of it going through every little piece of that geometry at that distance and analyzing it for contour. Okay. The other thing is that the U in the V spans determines the resolution of the surface. So the fewer that we have, the more general, control the surface is going to make. So if I have, just like it's again like resolution. If I have lots of U and V spans, that means that I can follow a contour very carefully. But you have to be careful, because if you create too many, it could use up a lot of memory, and if you don't have a lot of RAM and stuff, it could crash. Usually for big broad surfaces, 10, when you start to get into topographies and things like that, 50s and 100s are probably in the range that you're going to want to have. Okay, and then the stiffness is basically how taut that surface is. So if you can imagine, this is a rubber membrane that we're sucking down over those contour lines to create a surface. It's the pliability of that rubber. So if that rubber is stretching, it's kind of stiff, it's going to kind of find those tight directions between those different contours. Now if it was a saggy and floppy, like a wet sheet of silk or something like that, it might actually start to kind of sag in places that we don't want to. So turning that up to a stiffness of 5 allows us, again, to kind of just be a little bit closer to our contour lines. For now, we don't have to worry about this. Adjust tangency and automatically trim. I would just leave those as default right now. So the other thing we can do is we can preview what it's going to create on this surface by clicking preview here. So it's going to calculate. It might take a minute or two because we're trying to do this at good resolution, and I've got screen recording software going in the background and stuff, so that might become a little bit of an issue. But okay, so we've got it here, and we can kind of turn, again, I'm right-clicking in the mouse and scrolling around, and we can see here that it's following that geometry. We can kind of see on this edge here that it's actually following these contours quite nicely. So we're getting a nice, accurate surface. Okay, so that gets our surface, and so we like that. We like how that pops out, so we're going to say OK. And now we have a surface. Okay, so now what we need to do is we need to organize ourselves. Okay, so we talked about our layer. So click on the layer. It's the pie-shaped thing. And what we want to do is this, when we have a layer here and it has a check mark, that is the layer that is currently active. So any geometry that you're going to create is going to be built on this layer. Okay, you'll notice up here that we have a light bulb that turns on and off visibility, and then this lock here that turns on and off by clicking it on and off whether or not we can select that geometry on that surface. So this was my previous testing, so that is locked, so I don't want to mess with that. And then here is the representation of the line work, so the color. The important thing to remember here is the color that you select here is the color that it's going to come in by default into Illustrator. Okay? So I had created a layer, layer 1, and now what I want to do is start to organize this file. So I want to create a new layer so that I can put this surface on here. So I want to say, okay, this is where my surface is going to go. Okay, and to put that surface on there, again, there's many different ways that we can do this, but the way I like to do it is just to click on that surface. So when we click on it, now you can see the U and the V. The U and the V are basically the surface's X and Y coordinates, okay? So the surface has its own X and Y coordinates that's separate from the world's X and Y coordinates. And when we get into texture mapping, that will become more important to understand that concept. So we'll go, but for now, just understand this is what we were trying to fit. So if we counted these would be 50 lines this direction and 50 lines that direction. Okay? If you had a rectangular shape, we might want to have 50 lines in one direction and maybe 75 or 100 lines in one direction if we wanted to keep that spacing kind of square that and regular versus having a more rectangular. But that doesn't really matter that much right now. So we've selected it. Now we want to move and move it onto that layer. So what we want to do is just come down here to the bottom, select where it says layer 1, and we want to just say, okay, put it on that surface there. Okay. When you select it, yours might be selecting in when it turns yellow for you. I like the red myself, so I just went in and changed the preference, so don't worry about that too much. But now this is on this layer, surface, and if I turn that off, it goes away. And I can now lock this surface, so not messing around with that. Now I have this geometry here that I use to create our work, and so I want to create a layer for that. So go up to here and create new layer, and we'll call that I call it construction. And so now I'll do Control A to select all of that, and then I'll do the same thing. Come down here. Actually, I'll show you a different way to do it. Okay, so I've got that selected. Let's go over here and let's right click and come down here. Change object layer. So now it's on construction. So you select where you want it to go and then say right click, change object layer when it's, because we don't have anything highlighted. So I'm going to lock that down and shut it off too. Okay. So now what we want to do is that we have the contours there, so if we wanted to, we could use that contour. But now what we want to do is create those that grid on that system here in the surface. Okay. Now we can select that surface. Oh, my computer is lagging because of the screen recording. Oh boy, what's going on here? I'm going to pause and come back, I think. Some fun stuff going on there. Okay, sorry about that. All right, we've got it unlocked. Now we've selected that. So what we're going to do now is create some of those lines. We don't need 50 lines. That would be way too many lines for our diagrams because we want it to be a little bit more simple. So this I'm going to show you is a great trick. It's a great uh, um, tool for you to create topography based on things. So let's go into one of our side ports. Oh, we lost it because we're in wireframe. So what we want to do is go up to ghosted again, so now we can see. Okay, and then what we want to do, there's a command called contour. So we just go up to our command line and start typing, and yes, you see that it starts to be contour. Okay. And so first thing is telling us select the objects that we want for the contour. So we want that surface. Okay. And we want to know which surfaces that we want. And the current layer is fine because we're basically going to use this as a construction layer, and then each step that we create geometry, we're going to create a new layer and place it on there to organize it. So we've got layer 1 assigned to current layer, okay, and we've got the geometry that we need, and then okay, hit enter, and then it's going to ask for a contour base point. So what I'm going to do is just select the corner edge of our 0, 0 point. And this is also something that would be good to always have your ortho, because it's going to create these lines perpendicular to whatever direction you draw this line that's going to point the direction. So if you do it sideways this way, it's going to create cuts going that direction. But what we want is to create our first set of contour lines. So I'm just going to show you how we would make a typical contour using this. Okay, so make sure the ortho is on. We'll come over here, click, and then it's going to ask us the direction, and we're going to click again. We're going straight up. Okay, then it's going to ask us the distance between contours. So we know that we had 1 inch contours. You got to be careful. This is where you have to understand what the scale is, because if you make it too tight, you'll end up with thousands of lines and it'll take forever to make. So you want to be careful about that. So we move these things up basically 2 inches. So I'm going to type in 0.5 inches just so that you can see a nice set of topography being generated. So now you can see how it's generating the contours based on that topography. Okay? So now if we go over here, look at that. We've got a nice set of smooth topography lines that we could use to export to the laser cutter to make the topography, our topography models. We could maybe even take it over to the CNC, or if you're a glutton for punishment, you can cut each of these things out by hand. But this is a handy piece to do. Okay, so that's not exactly what we want, but since I've already created it, I'm just going to go ahead and create a new layer, call it contours, and I'm going to select all. Oh, sorry. Control A, select all, but I don't want the surface this time. So I want to Control unclick the surface. So I'm just selecting the contours, and then I'm going to go down to the bottom and select contours. So now it's on that layer. And I can turn off that layer and I can lock it so I don't have to mess with it. But now what we're going to do is create these X and Y surface description section contours. we would call the proper name for those our UV lines. Okay? So what we're going to do now is basically follow the same thing, but we're going to do it in a top view. Okay, so we select our surface, type contour. So once it comes up, you can just hit enter once you see the command autofill. Okay, and so it's going to ask us for our base point. So again, I'm just going to pick this corner here, and I'm going to go this direction this time. Okay, but I'm going to change, and I'm going to type in 3 up here at the command. So for 3 inches, it's a little too tight. So Control Z to undo. Let's try that again by hitting the space bar. Space bar repeats the last command. Okay, so we'll select, hit enter, select the surface, contour base point, and going this direction, okay, the Y direction. And let's go with 5 this time. No, let's go 7. Yeah, that's better. It's still a lot, but that's okay. Okay, so 7. Control Z, spacebar, select the surface, hit enter. I'm doing this so you get repetition. It's meant to be that way. Okay, so let's go 14. There we go. That works nicely. Okay, and I want these square, so I'm going to hit the space bar again, but I'm going to go the other direction. Okay, oops. You want to make sure to hit escape. Type contour, hit enter. Okay, now we're going to go this other direction. So we start here, and we're going to tell it we want to go this direction. We're going to keep at that 14 so that we get square spacing. Hit enter, bam, there we go. Okay, so we've got our lines. Now we just want to select the lines, so let's go ahead and lock our surface over here in the layer. And then we can do Control A to select all of those. And now let's create a new layer, and we'll call these UV lines. Okay, hit enter. And then let's go down here and click on UV lines to move them to our UV line layer. Then we can check visibility to make sure that it's assigned to the layer that we want. Okay, so we've got the UV lines. Alright, so now we have the surface, we have the UV lines. Now we're going to get into making the direction, making our view. Okay, so there's a couple of great features that Rhino has that really help us. Okay, and they are called. And we can come down here and we can see named views, named construction planes, C-planes or construction planes, and named positions. Okay, we could click on those, and those will bring up palettes. Okay, and you'll notice that you might have to select named positions and whoa. Okay, so what I did was accidentally docked it in our in the side here, but we have named views and named positions. So what named positions do, which is really interesting. So when we talked about the program, where we had program boxes that might be scattered about, and we might start in one direction. So let's say that I have one here and another one here. And maybe another one here. Okay. So what I can do is say select these objects, and I can go to named position, and I can go save as. and I can say this is the start. So I'm just going to name it start. Click OK. And so you see it pops up over here that that's start. So whenever we start, I can click on that. Those will move to that position. So now let's say that we've organized this. So I'm going to move that element there and move. I'm just selecting and typing move that element there. And then maybe I've rotated this one a little bit. Move. Just typing move. Or using the gumball if I wanted to. So you can use either one. But now I have these. Now I can say, okay, I want to save that position as end. Okay, so now we have start and end. You got to make sure that those are selected so it knows what geometry it wants to record the positions for. Okay, so this is great. Like if you're going to do program showing how things shuffle around the site, or if you're going to show when you've built this great model that has the windows and the walls and all the structure, what this allows you to do is take all those components and do an exploded view of that. So taking all of these things and showing it all kind of separated out and kind of flying together, and without losing the finished model. So if I go back over here and I double click on start, bam, I'm right back to my original position. If I do end, boom, I'm back to that original position. So this is super handy to create diagrams and to move elements around and understand their positions. Okay, and it's really great for kind of thinking about different options of how you might arrange things. So this is a way of using Rhino as a design tool, a really cool design tool. Similarly, we can set up viewport views to be called named views so that we can always go to the same camera angle and get everything kind of set up in that same kind of camera angle. So that is also a nice little piece. So let's do something. And what we're going to do is let's start and select this perspective viewport. Now, in the viewport layout, we have some bunch of different options on how we can add different viewports, but one of them that's really helpful for diagramming and doing this is to create a new floating viewport. So you could start typing new, or you can just start typing float, and you can see that this new floating viewport. That's what we want. Okay, and then it's going to ask you which view you want. So for now, we just want to copy the active one, which is copying our perspective. But we could also click on it, and it could show up perspective, top, left, right, back, or a named view. So right now we're going to call perspective. Okay, and so now we have our own little viewport here. Okay, and we can use the right click and shift to pan and move. This is panning in the viewport when we're in perspective. That's shift and right click to do that. And then just right clicking again to rotate, orbit around. Okay, so we have this viewport. Now, there's also some nice things that's great, because perspective, as we know, perspective has converging lines, okay? But sometimes we don't want those converging lines, but we want to have what's called a parallel projection. So we want to create an isometric or an axonometric drawing so that it maintains its dimensional 90-degree relationships. The lines don't converge as they go further back. Okay, so we can do that because Rhino has a built-in command called isometric. So if I start typing isometric, I can create that. And then it's going to ask me which direction. Okay, so I could do northeast. That's not one I want. Northwest. Oh, let's try that again. Hit spacebar. Northwest, no. Southeast. Yeah, southeast. Southeast is what I want. Okay? And then I can still, now if I right click in there, it's, oops, lost it, it went off the edge. Sometimes that happens. To get it back, just type Z, E, zoom extents. Bam, we're back in there. So because it's a back to what I was saying is because it's a parallel projection, if I right click and move, it's going to pan and not orbit. Now if I hold control click, it will start to orbit, but that will mess up our view, so we don't want to do that. Okay, so once we get it set, we can find our zoom factor that we want, get this all kind of set up on our view the way we want, and we can name this view. Okay, so now we go over to our panel that says named views, or we can type named view, hit enter. Okay, and then I'm going to click save as, and you can call it isometric, but I'm just going to call it saved view so I don't confuse myself with the other one. Click OK. Now you see that we have this saved view. Okay, so some great things about this. Because we have a floating viewport, let's say that we have all of these different items, but we still want to be able to use the same kind of angle and everything. So if I click on this object here, that's selected. I can't see it in this view, but I want to see it in this view because I want to create a diagram with it later. I can type zoom and hit enter, Z, okay? And then I can click selected. Oh, I got to make sure that my Rhino viewport is selected, the one that I wanted to see in. So let's try that again. Z, enter, and then S, selected. And bam, now we have that view that's set up there, and it doesn't change any of the angles or anything, but it actually has it all set up, and we've been able to move around basically that viewport. Okay, so I'm just going to pan to be quick and dirty about getting us back to where we are. Okay, so a couple of other things that we need to do is we know that there's a couple of things when we're going to bring in two separate things. We're going to bring in lines, and then we're going to bring in a rendered image as a backdrop. So how do we keep those two things aligned and scaled correctly? Now, other tutorials you'll find online show ways of doing it, but then you have to scale it and you have to guess, and it's a bunch of guesswork and everything, and it's a pain in the butt. So one of the reasons we selected a very specific size of 8.5 by 14 is because I can know what that size is, and I can create a ratio. So it's a ratio of 8.5 to 14. So what this allows me to do is create a viewport, okay, that is that 8.5 by 14. Okay, so select this viewport, and if we go over to our panels here where we have our layers, let's go over to where it says properties, which is this rainbow circle. Now it's showing, see, this is the properties of that viewport. So if I wanted to, I could say put in 1400 pixels. These are pixels, not in inches. So I'm just saying I want 100 pixels per inch. That would be 1400 by a height of so 850, but that would be too big. So what I'm going to do is just cut that in half. So half of 1400 is 700. Okay. And then half of 850 is 425. Hit enter. Okay, so now our viewport is actually sized perfectly for our sized perfectly for our going in and importing it so that we can snap to the page and have it perfectly set up. Okay, so now what we have is basically viewing what we're going to see on the page. So we can now start to zoom in and zoom out and kind of compose where we anticipate this being on the page. And my recommendation is to give yourself a little white space to start with. You can always crop down, but you can never get it back. So make sure you got enough room around this piece. Okay, so we have that. So one of the things that we need to do is figure out a way to show the viewport boundary. So basically what this is viewing. So we want to create what this view is. And then when we make that into a flat 2D lines, then we'll be able to have something to scale to snap to. So if this was a perspective, like over here, our other viewport, we could have an option within Make 2D that we could just select and it would actually create the boundary of the viewport. But since we are in a parallel projection, which means orthographic projection, no converging lines, we don't have that option in Make 2D. It's grayed out, so we have to create our own. And we do that by doing a little trick with the camera. So make sure that the viewport that you want we're going to show the camera as an object, and then we're going to build some geometry based on that camera. So what we're going to do is take this viewport, and then we're going to start typing camera. That comes up, and then what we want to do is show. So whatever the active viewport is, that's the camera it's going to show. Okay? So I'm going to move this down here. I'm not going to close it. I'm just going to move it down so that I can see my perspective. So now you can see that I have the camera, and this is the viewport. This is the view edge. Well, I can't quite select these edge points, but I can select these points. Okay? So what I want to do, I'm going to make this a little bit bigger. I'm going to pan around. And I'm going to delete these objects because they're not helping us right now. Okay. Pan around here until I see these 4 points, or 3 points. So you remember how I said that it's really great that there's multiple ways of creating a rectangle, so corner to corner. But here what we want to do is kind of make it at 3 points because this is at an odd plane. Corner to corner, it's going to build from our construction plane. So what we want to do is say, give it 3 points so it will build outside of the construction plane at the angle of the camera. So we're going to click that one. We're going to select, make sure that down at the bottom that your object snaps. This was turned on, so it's highlighted. And then make sure that point is selected. Otherwise, you won't be able to select these things and you'll find frustration. So what we're going to do is click here on this point, snap to this point, and snap to that point. Now we couldn't snap to these points because there's no points. This is an abstract thing. But now we can go over and you can escape or cancel, and then once that's created we can select that line. Okay, so now we're going to use the scale tool again. So let's type in scale, but this time we're going to use the full scale, the full 3D scale. So we're just going to type scale, and the way scale works is that you choose an origin point. So we're going to choose that point here. Okay, and one of the things that we know is that this is a halfway point, this is a midpoint. So really all we need to do is double the size of this thing, and we want to point it in the right direction. So as long as our mouse is going in the right direction, if we just type in 2 and hit enter, it's going to scale to the full size of the viewport. So now we have our camera viewport edge. And if we come down to our Rhino, the floating viewport, we can just barely see it along this edge. You may not be able to see it, you may not, depending on the graphics card and your resolution and things like that. But basically that gives us our viewport. Okay, so now we don't need to see the camera anymore. So let's select our the viewport that we want. Type camera, and let's hide that camera. Okay, but you'll notice that we still have our viewport. Okay, so the next thing we need to do is go back and organize, because that viewport, we want to have it on its own layer. So let's go over to our panels on the right hand side, click on the layers, which is the pie, multicolored pie, looks like a French flag. And then we want to create a new layer, so we go up to there. Oops, I created two. I got a little antsy. I'm going to select this one, delete. And select this one, and I'm going to click in here, kind of double clicking to change this, and we're going to call that viewport outline. Okay, I'm going to move this up, and then I'm going to go down here to make sure that that gets moved onto that viewport outline. And then we do our check to make sure, yep, when we turn it off, it's off. Okay. But let's lock that down because we don't want to move that. That's a very important feature. Okay. So the things that we are creating now are pretty important not to move around. Okay, so now we've got that. Now we're ready to make 2D. Okay, so the make 2D command takes whatever view we're in, and it basically figures out and projects the lines down into a two-dimensional flat plane. So it makes a 2D drawing of it. And it also looks at things like parts of the geometry, and it will decide if that line that it's going to create is going to be hidden by the geometry of the surface. So it will automatically figure out hidden lines and tangent lines for us. It's a really great command. Okay, so we've got our viewport that we're ready to go, and we have our geometry, and we have our viewport. So let's go over here and let's show what we want. We want our contour lines and our viewport outlines. We want both of those. Don't want the contours. But one thing I want to do real quick, and this is a great trick, is that I want to have an outline of this surface. Okay, so one of the ways that we're going to do this, I'm going to show you how to do this once we make the make 2D command. It's using a curved boolean. It's a great little trick. So, but make sure that we have the viewport outline and the UV lines, and then make sure everything else is locked, because we want to just be able to do Control A and select everything, and then we're ready to go. It's also important that you make this command from the view that you want the 2D drawing to come from. So let's type up here make 2D. It should automatically fill in, but if not, just click the down arrow to find that command. Okay, so now it's asking us what objects we want to draw. So let's do Control A, and now you can see that our UV lines and our outline for the viewport is created. And then since we're ready, we can hit enter. Okay, then it's going to come up. So automatically, what we want is this current view, because we want this kind of cool isometric. But you could create 4 views, like left top, left, right, and an axonometric. The other things that we want to make sure that we can put in here is making sure that we have the tangent and hidden lines, and then we have some options here, but we're just going to leave it all kind of as it is. Click OK. It's going to take a minute to process. So now, if we go over to our top viewport, zoom out, oh, I had the bottom, I had the wrong thing selected. So back up. Make sure we're selected again here, our proper viewport. Make 2D. Control A to select everything. There we go. Oh, you know what? I messed up. We got to go back one more time. We need to have that surface selected. So just Control Z. Let's go back. We need to have the surface selected because that's how it's going to know whether or not it has a hidden line or not. Okay? So make sure that the surface is unlocked when we do this too. Okay? Make sure that we're in the right viewport. Type make 2D. Control A. Enter. Keep everything current, make sure current view is set. It's going to take a little bit. All right, so now we got it right. Okay, so there we have it. We have all of our make 2D, and if you come over here, you can see that it's created a series of make 2D lines over here. So it's set up instead of surface and visible, and doesn't look like we have any hidden lines this time because we don't have any great variations in geometry, but that's okay. So now we have our make 2D. So one of the things that we can do that is really helpful, you can close this viewport now, but I'm not going to. I'm just going to hold it off to the side because I got things I want to do. But I want to go work in the top view for a minute. Okay, so now we've got everything, but you'll notice here that if I select parts of this outline, it's kind of broken up into pieces and chunks. I don't have a real clear outline of what I want. So for the moment, what I'm going to go over to my surface and turn off the lines and the output. So really all we have is the viewport and the make 2D drawings that we have. Go ahead and lock those down too so we don't mess with those. And so what we have is we want to create an outline. So one of the ways we can do that is by using the curve boolean. So CURV, and if we start going down, okay, there it is, curve boolean. And we want to select the curves, so we want to select these curves. And we don't want to delete the input, but we do want to combine the regions. Okay, hit enter. And it says what regions do we want to keep. But what we want to do is just click on the outside. And so bam, it creates a geometry for the exterior for us. And once we're done, we'll hit enter. But you'll also know that we could click on the inside of these things and it's kind of like a fill. And so if we wanted to have select geometry within other geometries, we can make those regions as well. So easily selectable. Hit enter. Okay. So we have that selected. It's being put on layer 1. And what we really wanted to do is come down in here. And what I'm going to do here is create a new layer. I'm going to call that outline, object, outline, and right click, change object layer. Okay, there we go. So now we're pretty much ready to export our work to Illustrator. Don't close the viewport yet. Let's just go over here to our top view. So you'll notice that under Make 2D it has all of these sublayers. So that's how we can make a new sublayer. But if we're selecting in here and create a new layer, that way we can organize it. So everything on the Make 2D is under one layer, which is really quite nice. So the next thing we want to do is we want to select everything underneath here. So if we right click on Make 2D, and if we go down here, so we can select the objects on that layer, but there's nothing really on that layer. Everything is in sublayers underneath that. So we want to select sublayer objects. And you'll notice that it selects everything there. And that's everything that we want to export into Illustrator. So the next thing we do is go over to File, and then okay, that brings up an export. So find a place that you want. So you might have to create a file or put them on your desktop, someplace that's easy to find. I created a folder on my desktop, and here it's going to probably default to Rhino 3D object, but what we want to select is a come on, computer. It's really not that difficult, seriously. I'm just going to call it surface diagram. Hit save. Okay, so what it's going to do is ask you, do you want a snapshot of the current view or do we want to keep model scale? I generally try to make model scale always, or keep it to some scale. Right now, since we're working in small things, we can make it 1 to 1 inch. But if this was a big building, of course, we could say it's 1 inch equals 4 feet if we wanted a 1/4 inch scale. The other thing is, since most of this stuff is going to be for printing, RBG, or on the web, RBG is a good one. If we know it's going to go to a good high quality printer, then CMYK is the color space that you want to use. I'll talk a bit about that later. For now, just select RGB, click OK. So it's right up here. It's told us that it has selected that properly. Okay. So the next thing we want to do is to get a cool rendering out of this thing. So what we're going to do is, since we're done with the Make 2D, let's lock that and hide it. So we don't need that anymore. But what we really want to look at is the surface. Okay. Now it comes up, and if you don't have this set up as ghosted, that could be a problem. Let's try rendered this time. Okay. So now we see the rendering. Okay. A couple of things that we can do here. One you'll notice is that we have a gray background, so that's not something that we want to start off with. We want to have a white background, and really this isn't the kind of quality that we want. We want to have a little bit more control, so we're going to get into the rendering tools. Now these are just super basic tools that are built into Rhino, but they'll be helpful. So a couple of things you want that are related to this is we want to be able to describe its environment. So if we go to panels and make sure that your environmental editor is turned on. And when that pops up, you could drag it and push it over into the display, into your palettes over here, or just keep it floating. That's fine. Mine's already turned on, and it's over here. And you can see that it has this little blue egg shape. Okay, so that is an environment that we have. Okay, and these are all going to be function, if we have on the render tool tab, it's going to all deal with these. Okay, these are our rendering pieces. It's not exactly what we see in the viewport, but we'll get to that in just a minute. Okay, so what we want to do is we want to create an environment. So I'm just going to create a new environment. So we go to make sure you're on your environment tab, click on this big plus sign, and it's going to come up with this render content. You could click into environments, and there are some preset environments, but what we want to do is just to create our own real blank environment. So let's just click that, hit enter, and I'm going to rename that you can name it whatever you want. But I'm just going to call it second environment. Okay, second environment. Now what we want to do, the first thing is I want to get rid of this gray background. I don't want that background at all, because I need to make sure that when I render it, it's on white so that it blends in really nicely. So I'm just going to click on the color, and I'm going to go over here and select white. Okay, so that gets us set up. We could also put background images and things like that, but that's all we want for now. Okay, then since we have our environment, we want to go and tell the rendering engine what environment to use and all of that stuff. So let's go over here to render settings. Click on that. Okay, and it's going to bring up this dialog box. Okay, and you'll notice that it's in here under Rhino Renderer. If we expand that, we can see render details and focal blur and some other things like that. But we're going to keep it really simple. Again, we can come up here and we want to make sure that we understand the resolution. Yours probably says 640 by 480. But since I was last using that viewport, our special viewport, which is what we want, I'm choosing the viewport at 700 by 425. Okay, for now, you should be at normal, kind of 2x, and I think that that's good for testing. Eventually, what we want is at 5. So I'm just going to go ahead and help you and say choose 5. Then the things that we want to do are create some ambient color. So by default, yours probably is black. So black is fine, but it's going to create kind of dark shadows. And what I want is to kind of have like it's outside, so it has a little bit of a bluish kind of colder tint to it, that will also contrast nicely with the warm red color. So what I've done is gone over here, just clicked on the color, and then I went down and selected the next step up from absolute dark blue. Okay, and hit enter. Bottom color I left exactly the way it is. So background, yours might be selected at solid color. What we want to do is have an environment. And then here we can click on which environment that we want. So I'm going to click on this second environment, which is the environment that we just created, so that's selected. Let's scroll down a little bit further. And then the next thing we want to do is to select skylight. And so skylight, what that's going to do is replicate the sky dome, this kind of really soft lighting from all kind of different angles. So select that and make sure that that's turned on. Okay, we can go to render details now. And These settings we'll get into a little bit later, but I don't want you to worry about them right now. Let's just keep them at the default that they are, but you have some different ways that we can change if it's a kind of noisy or not. It's kind of a seemingly bad render quality. We can play with those, but I think with the settings, the default settings will be fine. Okay, so click OK. And then, so that's all kind of set up. We have our viewport selected. Now let's go over and create a little render preview so that we can kind of see real quickly what this thing is going to look like. All right. Oh, let's go back here. And we can see that we can barely see it. Okay? That's okay for now. We see it has some color. What I can do here is I have some options here to adjust how this thing looks. Okay? So one of the things I can do is change the gamma. Going higher is going to make it lighter and overexpose it. So if I start to go to the negative direction, you can see that it's darkening this thing up. Okay? You can see that it's pretty pixelated right at the moment, but that's just because we are doing a preview render. And we can kind of get it to where we want. And remember that what we want is an image that has maybe just a little darker than what we started for, because we can tone it down with opacity. But I'm just going to say that I want to get something real close. And that looks real close. And I want to make sure that the white background stays white, that we've got a hint of the topography, the light showing us shading on that topography. So that's good. So that looks pretty good. So we know, okay, so around 0.627, we'll just take a note of that. Okay, close that, and let's just render it for real this time. It's going to take a minute or two. Because it's going to do it at much nicer, do the anti-aliasing and everything. Okay. Let's go back to that viewport. Now let's go back here and let's get down into where we were at. About 0.67. And that looks okay. I think that's a good start. We could maybe go just a tad darker. 0.61. Okay, so we've got that set. Now all we want to do is save the image. Okay, save. Navigate to where you saved your last, your Illustrator file. Put it in the same folder. And I'm going to name this surface render. Name it something that you'll remember. Okay. So now let's go over and open up Illustrator. All right. So we're in Illustrator now. First thing you need to do is make sure you can create a blank page if you want. I think creating a new document, we go to File, maybe. Let me pause this guy since he's using a lot of memory. And we're done with Rhino for the moment. Hello. There we go. Give that a second while it pauses. Okay, so now we're over here in Illustrator. Now let's go File and New. Okay, it's going to come over here. Right now, all we need is one artboard, and yours is going to say letter, but let's go and click that and select legal. You'll notice that we have 1008 by 612. Those are in points. We can change that to inches if we like by doing that here, if that would makes it easier for you. You can also select pixels, whichever. Inches is fine. Then the other thing we want to do is we want to make sure yours is probably set at portrait. We want to set it at landscape. You can notice that it switches these around. Advanced color mode, CMYK. If we click down on it, that advanced arrow, let's just select RGB. We want to make sure that we're always at high because we want our things to be sharp if we ever save them out as JPEGs. All right, and then we click OK. And now create a new document for us. But more importantly, we're not necessarily going to use this document, but that gets us set up so that when we open our Illustrator file that we just imported, that it's going to default to this, this size. Okay, so now let's go File, Open. Alright, I believe it's called Basic Surface Diagram. So we're finding our nope, that's not it. Surface Diagram. That's what I called it. That's the right one. Okay. Hit Open. Okay, and when you open it, it's probably going to be like too big. Okay, so what you want to do is scroll to zoom out. You can see it's huge. Okay, so what we want to do is just do the same thing. Control A. All right. And then all we have to do, since this is selected, we go over here to these anchors, and we can modify the size of these things by clicking and dragging. But what we want to do is make sure that it maintains its aspect ratio. So what we want to do is hold the Shift key down when we left click and drag it. So now it stays at that angle that we want, or the aspect ratio that we want. And we've got a good size, so now we can zoom in here again. And all we want to do now, oops, is basically align this border with the edge of our paper. So if we go up into View, there's these Smart Guides. And it's not a bad idea to turn those on right now. They should be on by default. The one thing that we're going to do, let's do Control A again. And we have two different selection tools. So we have a selection tool, and then we have a direct selection tool. So the direct selection tool allows us to pick out items within an object. So a vector is composed of lines and anchor points and handles. So that's what all these little dots are, anchor points. So by using the direct selection tool, we can select these individual anchor points. If we're using just the regular selection tool, it's just going to grab the whole line and all of the selection points. So one of the things that's nice is that if we select the direct selection tool, you see that everything is still selected because we had it selected before. But now I can go over here and hover over where it says anchor, and then I can click, hold down, and I can drag it until it kind of snaps into this bottom corner. I can zoom in there, and I can get this a little bit closer. So Command or Control A, until it says intersect, intersect. Okay, so then we know. So scroll to zoom out. Now we want to go back and scroll this edge out to there. So if we switch back over to the selection tool, we get our handles back. And if we zoom in, scroll to zoom in, we can then left click and then hold the shift key down, and we can intersect there. So now it's perfectly aligned to the sheet. It's perfectly to scale. Everything is wonderful, and we don't have to mess with it. Okay, so we have this viewport outline, and that's pretty much done. You'll notice that here all of our object surfaces or layers came in for us, so this becomes really handy. So if you don't see this, this tool over here on the side is your layer palette. Okay, a quick overview of the Illustrator is, again, you have your global tool sets up at the top. You have your basic command set on this side, on the left-hand side. These have all your drawing tools and selections and ellipses, very much like Rhino. Over here, very much like Rhino, has layers and modifiers to the image. For now, if you just hover over them, they'll tell you what they are: color guides, cooler, swatches, brushes. But for now, what we really want to focus on is just layers. Okay? So click on that. The layers pops out. Here's what you want. So just like in the Rhino layers, we have visibility, and we have the ability to lock and toggle just like in Rhino. We also have the ability, if we come over here, we can click on that and it will select the artwork that is related to that piece. So there we have our object outline. Okay, so that shows us that that is what we have selected. Right here shows us, indicates the color. We can, right now they're all black, but we could change these to have different colors so that we could see the different elements that are on the page. So anytime you want to select something, you can just click over here that's on that layer, and it's going to select everything that's on that layer. The other cool thing is that if we want to move things to a new layer, we can click and hold this and drag this black box to another layer. So I could drag it here and it would basically move it to those layers. Down at the bottom, just like where Rhino had it at the top, down at the bottom we have create new layer and delete selection and create sublayers. And we'll get into each of those things a little bit later. But for now, we're just going to focus on this. So we have let's go down here to our viewport outline, and let's click over here and select that. So now it's selecting that outline. We don't need that outline, so we can lock it and we can hide it. So we don't really need that there. We will unlock it and unhide it, or we will unhide it when we import the image so that we can snap to it nice and easy. But basically that's it. So now we want to change how these lines look. Okay? So what we want to do is, just like in Rhino, if we left click and drag, I can select all of the artwork. Okay? And then I can come over here, and we have on this palette, this is how we start to tell what the appearance of these objects are. So the stroke is going to be the outline, okay? And the fill is what's going to be filled on the inside. So just to show you an example, I will draw an ellipse, or maybe a rectangle. Come on now. and I'm going to, so if I have the stroke, that's black, that's why it's appearing black on the outside. I can swap between these. If I flip it that way, now it becomes filled, okay? So that's between the stroke and the fill. So line thickness is called stroke here. So line weight is called stroke. So let's delete that. One of the first things that we know is if we select all, you can also do that by Control A, and you'll see that it's defaulting at 1 point. Well, we want to have it a pretty light line, so if we click on the edge up here, so this is going to show all of the different appearances. So the opacity of these lines that are selected, the styles, some transform, which is control how. We'll get into that a little bit later, but for now, let's just click on the stroke, and let's select 0.5 points. And so that'll make them nice and smooth. But we want the outline to be thicker, so let's go over here to our layer, click on this outside edge, and we want that one to be, let's start out with 2 points. So it's nice and bold. Okay, so we have that. So there's our surface. Okay, so basically that's it. Now if you have hidden lines, I'll just select a line so you can see how we would do that. Let's say you have hidden lines over here as a layer. You could select those, and then the way we can get those dash lines that I had is to go up here to stroke, click on that, and see it brings up more options about these strokes. Okay, here's our weight, that's fine, but we want it to be a dash line, so we want to click dash line. Yours might say 12 points, but for this I found that if you double click on that and click and type in 2, that'll get us the kind of dash line that we want. We can also add arrowheads and some other things and control the way this thing looks that we'll get into a little bit later. But so now let's zoom in there, and you can see that we've got our nice dash line there. I'm going to Control Z and undo that because I don't have any hidden lines at this point. That's how we change that stroke. So now we have that. Those are all set. So now let's just lock these guys and unlock and unhide our border background, because that's going to help us bring in the rendered image. So the next thing we do is we want to place the rendered image behind there. So the two things we need to do is that we need to create a layer for that rendered item to come in on. So we go down to the bottom of the Layers tab, click New Layer, and then we're going to call that Render. And then we want to make sure that that's highlighted so that that's our current. So that's where it will place the image. So we'll click File. But one other thing before we do that is that layer order matters. Okay, whatever's on the top of this stack is going to obscure whatever's below it. So if I bring in that rendering, it's going to totally not show any of these lines. So we really want that to be toward the bottom, if not the bottom of the stack. So if we just left click, and drag down to the bottom, make sure you're not dragging inside one of these things, because then it will, if that's highlighted, that'll go under as a sublayer. We want to go all the way down. Make sure that that's on. Now let's go up in File, up at the top, and Place. Okay, and I think we called it Surface Render. Yeah, that seems about right. Yep. Okay, then we'll select that. And here's an important thing to think about. Down at this bottom is a link. Okay, so by default, what Illustrator is going to do is actually link the file. So it's going to basically tell Illustrator where to find that image, to show that image. It's actually not going to embed it within the file. And that's good for a couple of reasons. One is that I could go back and change, re-render this, get it better, tweak it, and I don't have to re-embed it. I can just I'll just tell it to go and look at the image again and get the new version, and I don't have to do anything. So this is really great to kind of mock up. You can do something quick and dirty, and then later as you fine tune it, these start to come together really fast. So generally, it also offers a smaller file size, so linking is good. The bad part about linking is that you have to maintain its location. So you can't really, once you start putting something in a place, you have to keep it in that place, or you have to go in and relink things. So it's not good to give to your friend Jimmy necessarily, because you might have to broken links and things like that. So we'll cover that a little bit more when we get into portfolios and presentation boards. But so for now, keep it linked, click place. Okay, so now it's going to come up and ask me where I want to put this thing. And so what I want to do is just come up to this corner point anchor and click. Okay, and now it pops in here. Now, just like we did on the last one, I can click and drag it to that corner, and bam, perfectly aligned. All of our artwork is right behind it. Life is good. Okay? Now, we're pretty much set with that guy. We lock him down in the layer palette, and since we don't need to move him around at all, we can hide the viewport outline and lock that, since we don't need that anymore. Now we just have this image. These are all locked down. So now what I want to do, like if we go back to come on. Drop shadow on this bottom piece, and then we'll get into the people and everything in just a minute. So that's the next thing we're going to do. And the way we're going to do that is by using that outline as our basis. So what we're going to do is unlock that outline now, the object outline, and we're going to select that layer. Now if we come up over to this corner, up in this corner over here, we get a set of options. So if we click on that, these are all the options we can do to these layers. But what we really want to do is just make a duplication of that layer. Okay? So now we have two of those, and this has ... and what it would actually be called is copy. But I want to change that name. So the way we change that name is just come over here to this kind of blank space and double click. And then that'll bring up our option here. And I'm just going to call this drop shadow. And that'll be fine. There's some other options that we'll get into later. So now we have the drop shadow. And of course, because it's a drop shadow, we want it to be below everything. So we'll bring it down to the bottom, because it's our last thing in the stack. And the other thing that we're going to do is that we don't need the line around it, we just need it to be filled solid, so that when we show it as a drop shadow, that it's solid and not a line. So let's select that, and let's go over here to our tool palette, and then just swap those. Okay? Now you'll notice that, well, we don't see anything. That turned black. Why is it not black? Well, that's because the render is over the top of it. Okay? So we want to figure out a way that that whatever is white, that we want to see behind it. So there's two things we want to do. One is we want to unlock the render, and we want to select it. So let's go over here and select it. So now we've selected the render. And we want to do, what we want to change is how that image, how it masks itself. So we have these different ways of layering these things. So what we want to come over here is to where it comes up to transparency. So it's these two little dots. Click on that. So here's how we can do that. There's many different options, okay? But there's two things that you want to kind of imagine. So if you want white to go away, white to be transparent, you'll use multiply. If you want black to go away, the opposite is screen. So what we're going to do is say we want multiply, okay? So since most of that was white and what was black behind it is now going away. So we see the outline being fully black like it's supposed to. But that's not exactly what we want. So let's go back to the layers. And we're done with the render for now, so let's lock him back up. What we want to do is work on this guy. So the first thing is we'll select that guy, and we want to change him to be white because we want the render to show back up. So we come over here and we click, or if you double click, it will bring up this. But for now, just one click will bring us up to this color picker, and we can click white. Bam, there we go. Now we got our image back. Okay, so we don't have a stroke on it, so it's not going to compete with the stroke of the original layer. It's white, but now we want to get that drop shadow. So the way you do that is we can come up over here. There's an automatic thing that allows us to do that up in Effect. Effect, if we come down to Stylize and over to Drop Shadow. Alright, so now it's going to give us our options to look at. So yours are going to probably be up in the 75% range. So let's say, I think yours is at 75, and yours might be somewhere along like 0.1 inch, or much different than these. So, but you can't see anything. But if we come down here and click Preview, we can start to see what that is. Okay? So what we want to do is we don't want it to be very bright. Okay? We want it to be much lighter than that. But we also want it to be offset. We want it to be kind of following this line. So I'm going to move it over to the left a little bit. And then I'm going to move it down. Okay? The other thing I want to do is now I want to start to get the right tone. So now I want, and so what I'm doing is I'm clicking on this, and you can click here, or you can click inside the box, and I can use the up and down arrow keys to change it. And so and you can also just type in there. So all I'm going to do is just test. So I'm just going to go down until I feel like it's pretty good. I want it to be really subtle. I don't want this thing to jump out at all. I just want it to be really subtle. So let's say around 12%. Okay. The other thing I want to do is I want it blurred more. I don't want it, you can kind of see that hard edge. I want it to be really subtle. So I'm going to turn up the blurring. So it's just like it's barely floating in space. Okay, and once we're done, click OK. Click off of that, and then we can see it's a little bit better. Now you can see it's really subtle, really clean. Subtlety is our friend. So that's what we want to look for. All right, so let's say though that I want to go back and I want to edit that. Well, one of the ways we can do that, this is what's really great about Illustrator, is we could go and select that back. And if we come up over to this, where it says Appearance, We can also find these appearances up here under Window. We can click on Appearance, and those will show up. Okay. Anything that's over here is going to show up in the window and more. Okay. And so it's going to show the appearance. It's telling me what kind of stroke. It doesn't have a stroke. It's filled with white, and here's a drop shadow. That's an effect. And then the opacity is default. So if I want to go back and edit that drop shadow, I can just click here, and it brings up that edit. And so I can make any kind of changes that I want. Make sure and click Preview so you can see what you're doing. Click OK. All right, so we're pretty much there. So now all we have to do is add a couple of people, and we're done. So let's go over to our layers now that we're done. Let's go down here, and let's lock that drop shadow since we're all done with that. And we're done with the outline, so let's lock that guy back up. And select that one, and let's create a new layer. And let's call this one our action line verb. So this is going to be what's happening, what's going on, what's the relationship that we're going to build on. So now that that's selected, I can come over here. I know that I'm going to want it to be a stroke right at the moment, and I know that I want it to be red. So I'm just going to double click on that stroke so I can come up and get my color picker. Here I can change all the hues by dragging this little slider. I can also type it in directly. And then I can select any color within here by clicking through here. So what I want is kind of a dark red, really saturated. This becomes less saturated. So I want something that's like a dark red. Pop there. Okay. So we've got that. So the next thing I want to do is, you can see that it's snapping, and that's our smart grid. So this is going to make our life hard. So I want to go up to View, and I want to turn off those smart guides because I don't want it to help. See, now I can cleanly fit around there. So as we're creating this next little piece, it'll help us. All right, so let's create a line. Let's create a curve. So the way we do that, there's a couple of different ways in Illustrator. We can create straight lines here, but the way we want to do it is using a pen tool. So let's click on that pen tool, and pen tool works in a very similar way to Rhino. You click, and you create a line. But you notice that that's not curved. Okay, if we want to curve between these things, we have to click and drag. So click and hold it down and drag. So click and drag, and you can see that it creates these handles. And that's how we determine the curves. Okay? So once we do that, and we have to do that every time we want to curve, click and drag. Because if we don't, if we just click, that gives us a hard junction. Okay? Hit enter when you're done. And you can see that we created this. And you can also see that I didn't turn off my fill, so it's trying to close this shape and fill it in. So to fix that, I go over here, click on the fill once, and then I click down here, none. And, oh, we got to select that item first. Sorry. Click, and none. There we go. All right. There we go. We don't need that. So, but let's go ahead and start to make our this time let's do wind. So I want to go over here, and I'm going to say, how does the wind affect this terrain? What kind of microclimate? So if the wind's coming this direction, what kind of microclimate? It looks like there's a little bowl right here. So the wind is probably going to come up and kind of split around this thing. And a little bit of it's going to come up and over and create this little sheltered space in here. So that's going to be pretty cool. So how do we do that? Well, let's go over here, make sure we're on our verb line, make sure everything else is locked so we don't screw anything up. And then let's just start creating this curve. So we'll start here. Maybe if it's wind, we're coming down. So I'm clicking and dragging, clicking and dragging, clicking and dragging. That'll be a little subtle. We want it a little bit squirrely because this is wind. Okay, so that's our first one. Hit enter. And you can go over here to selection tool, click, and get rid of it so we can kind of see. Well, that's awfully skinny. So let's make that bigger, make that thicker. So we go over here, select it, and then we can go up to the top and we see that here's our stroke. So we can make that thicker just by clicking up or clicking inside here and using the up arrow key. Okay. So that's fine. Maybe just a tad too thick. So maybe, yeah, that's fine. Let's just start right there. Okay. But that doesn't show us any directionality and it's not really compelling so far. So let's select it again and go to stroke. And we can change the endpoints so they could be rounded right now. So let's round them off. And then let's put an arrowhead on the end. So the start would be an arrowhead would be put on where we started. See, but we don't want that. We want it on our end so we can show direction. I don't like that arrowhead at all. So I like this one. Oh boy, that's way too big, isn't it? Okay, so now we can scale those arrowheads independently. So let's scale this arrowhead, clicking inside there and this using the down arrow key. If you hold the shift key and go down arrow, it will take bigger jumps. So that's one way of helping us out there. So that feels about right. Okay. Feels better. Get in there. But you know, what I really like is to have this end be a little bit thicker than this end. So it's kind of like, you know, gusty, and then as it splits, it loses some of its gusto. So there's a cool way we can do that. So we select it, and if we come over here to our tool palette and we go over here, the width tool, we click on this width tool, and we can come to this end, and click and drag, and we can make this thing as big as we want. And we can do that, and we can adjust it for the whole length if we wanted to. And so I'm just going to adjust it. That's a little bit much. I just made it bigger so you can kind of see it. Okay. So, you know, looking at this isn't, I don't know if I like that little squigglies there. So what I'm going to do is edit these points, okay? So I'm going to use a direct selection tool, and I think what I want to do is maybe just get rid of these guys. So if we do that, get rid of those, that little kink there by just erasing those two control points or anchors. So if I hold down the key, the click, and go over here and delete anchor point, and I can just come in here and say goodbye and goodbye. Okay, that's a little bit better. Now go to my direct selection tool, And I can just come over here and say, okay, select that guy. I want him to come here. And then if I zoom in, I'll show you, you can see that we have these anchor points. These are called handles. So with my direct selection tool, which is the white arrow, white cursor, I can come in and start to adjust that curve so that it's a little bit smoother. And then I want to adjust this one because I want it to be coming in kind of straight. There we go. That's looking better. There's a little weirdness happening here too, so maybe I'll click this guy and make it a little straighter. Maybe I don't need this one either, so I'll go back over here to delete anchor point. There we go. And use my direct selection tool again. Just kind of use that to drag it out and kind of smooth out that line. All right, cool. So that works. Gives us kind of what we want, what we need. So now let's spruce up that guy. So we're going to use a little subtle drop shadow to kind of look like it's hanging over the edge and kind of flowing over the edge of this surface, like that surface is tangible. So let's go over to our layers, select our arrow, and then let's go up to Effect, and Stylize, Drop Shadow. Click on Preview so we can see what it's doing. And what it looks like it's doing is almost nothing. Okay, that's because we have the blur turned way down or way up. So what we want to do is turn that down so that we can kind of see the action, see where it is. And then we can adjust this a little bit. Yeah, it looks pretty good. Let's try that. And then, so we've got that. Now let's just turn up the blur a little bit so that it pops up. It's pretty subtle. Okay. There we go. All right, so the last thing we want to do is add some peoples. So let's create a new layer. And if for you want to do another one that whips around the other side, that's fine. I'm just going to try to speed up our process here. So we want to create some peoples. Do that really simply. I'm just going to come over to our shape, click down, and I want an ellipse. And I'm just going to create a body and a head. And I'm going to select both of them, and I want them to be filled. So I swap those two. So now it's filled. I'm going to take that head and just use the cursor keys to move down slightly so that it's touching. And you could make a couple of these guys, but right now what I'm going to do is create and select both of them by just clicking and dragging a box to select them. And then I'm going to group them so I can keep them together. I can click on one of them and it'll keep it together. So I do that by going to Object, Group. So now I select one, it selects all of them. So the next thing, those are quite big, I just want little. This is a big terrain, so I want little people. And then I'm just going to drag these guys over and put them here. And then if I want to copy them, you want to make sure that you don't get these kind of arrows. You just want the simple arrow. If you hold down the Alt key and click and drag, you can create copies. I'll zoom in here a little bit more. Move this guy with my cursor keys over. And then to give a little personality to these guys, I'll use my direct selection tool. And I'll just come in here and select the heads and just use the arrow key to kind of move them around a little bit. I'll make one. It's okay. Could also just select that. Make it look like he's wearing a hat. Just to give some variation. This one's a little bit further away, so I'll use the regular selection tool to select him. And then maybe I'll make him just a wee bit smaller. Okay. We've got that all done. We lock up our final pieces and we're pretty much complete. And then we come up here to File. And I like to use Save As. And I am going to rename this because we opened up, we don't want to lose our original line work in case we want to redo it again. Make sure that you are in your folder that you want it to be in, and I'm going to call this Finished Wind. Adobe Illustrator, click Save. Another dialog box is going to pop up. It's going to ask you what version. Just save it at the current version. If you're working with people or other things, you might sometimes have to save down into older versions. But generally, that only really affects fonts and stuff, so I would just keep it at CC. Click OK, and we're all done. And so this is ready to bring into Illustrator if we want, or InDesign later on, and keep the vector line work, so this will stay all super sharp and nice. But there's a couple of other things we can do. So let's say we want to save this as a JPEG. We can go File, Export, and it defaults to PNG, and PNG is really good, so I'm just going to leave it as a PNG. The thing that you want to do, there's two things. One is if you don't select the artboard, it's not going to give you that scaled drawing. It's just going to crop as close as it can around the artwork itself. So I like to use artboards so that it keeps the pixels and the dimensions the same, so I know exactly what they are. And then I'm not going to change the finished name because it's just going to add the PNG to the end. Click Export. Now it's going to come up with resolution. So screens generally were 72 dpi, or pixels per inch. Now with iPad Retinas and all of that, and MacBook Pros and all of these higher end pieces, generally I would suggest saving at high, 300 pixels per inch. And with a PNG you can support background color as being transparent. You can say white is transparent. You can, it's fine. It's going to be white anyway, so, and I can use white just like our layering in Photoshop if we want to, but leaving it as transparent, that's fine too. But I'm going to select white. Click OK, and that's going to write it, and we've saved. So what I'd like you to do is to try this out and make a couple of these diagrams and save them out as PNGs, and so we can take a look at them a little bit later, and um, on Wednesday when we meet, and hope that you guys have a good weekend. Bye.